Thank you. Okay, well, welcome to our webinar today, everyone. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. I'm Roger Burt, Regional Account Manager with Avant Assessment, and I'm going to walk through test preparation and proctoring for the STAMP test. A couple of notes: we have enabled closed captioning for this webinar, and an email with all of the links that we will cover today will be sent in a follow-up email, including a link to the recording. One other thing I wanted to put out there from the beginning is that there are about as many different testing situations as there are schools testing. So with that in mind, this will be a general overview that you can use as a starting point as you move forward with testing. For those questions that are more unique to your specific situation, please feel free to contact your account manager for additional help or guidance. And at the end, there is a map with the account manager's emails so that you can contact the appropriate person. It will show which Avant account managers cover which areas, so you'll be able to see that. There will also be a link to a survey at the end of today's webinar to get your feedback, as well as to get information on other topics you would like to see us offer in the future. So to start, let's look at why we're testing in the first place. There are many reasons to test language proficiency. And before we get too far into those reasons, let's define what language proficiency is. And that is a learner's ability to use the language in the real world in spontaneous interactions. So with that said, the STAMP test will measure what learners can do with the language, and it's generally used for a few purposes. One purpose is to measure student growth in language acquisition and inform instruction, whether that be in a DLI program, in a secondary world language program, or an institute of higher education. To illustrate program quality and provide data to decision makers to get needed funding for program growth and improvement, and to qualify for state and/or global seals of biliteracy. So now the question is, why test with Avant specifically? First, our scoring accuracy and reliability are exceptional. Our inter-rater reliability or inter-rater agreement scores can be found in the research area of our website. Additionally, our tests are adaptive, meaning that test takers are not all being asked the same questions, but rather our test will adapt to each test taker to ensure that they are being appropriately challenged without receiving questions that are too difficult or too easy for the test taker. We'll get a closer look at this a little later in the webinar. Also, our writing and speaking scores are typically back within 10 business days, allowing for a quick turnaround to get scores in for seals of biliteracy, for example. Now, as we get into how to prepare for testing, we'll look at things to do long before test day, things to do a little closer to test day, things to do on test day, including proctoring tips, as well as how to access results after testing. One important aspect of test preparation for me has always been making sure that students feel confident and prepared for testing. To help with that, a few things that I would do early in the school year and then again in the middle of the school year were to show them what proficiency looks like at the level just below where most of them were functioning, the level they were generally functioning at, and then the level they are working toward. To do this, I would look at Avant's writing examples to show the progression of language from one level to the next. You can see here on our writing examples that at each level of proficiency, there is a description of what learners can do at that level, as well as an example in the language that you choose. Many of the languages that we test have the writing examples available. This way, I could look at the progression of language from one level to the next with my students. I would also walk through the Avant rubric to help students know how proficiency is rated. I tried to rate my students' proficiency the same way Avant rates anytime we would do activities focused on proficiency. This way, both my students and I had a better understanding of the proficiency guidelines, and students had fair expectations regarding their STAMP scores. You can see here how Avant scores language in writing and speaking. For each level of language, we identify the text type, whether that be words, phrases, simple sentences, etc. We also look at different aspects of language control. Using this together with the writing examples allowed me and my students to better understand proficiency and how it is scored. You could also look at our power-up guide, which allows test takers and teachers to click on the level of proficiency a test taker is at and see what things they can work on specifically to improve to the next level. The power-up guide is also available in Spanish and Arabic. You can see on the power-up guide that I clicked on Novice Mid. So if a student were functioning at Novice Mid, we would look at this together and see a description of what the learner can do at that level. And then right below that, we can see where it says, do these things to power up to Novice High. And then it goes into the details of work on connecting words that create very simple sentences, focus on creating simple meaning with the use of different verbs that deal with a wider variety of topics that address different aspects of a task, etc. Closer to test day, I would walk through the sample test with my students, projecting my sample test on the screen, and ideally, they would do the sample test on the device they would use on test day. This served a couple of purposes. First, it allows students to get familiar with the look and feel of the test and what they're expected to do in each section. Second, it would serve as an initial technology check of the devices. If a student could not type in the language on the sample test or could not record their spoken responses on the sample test, or if their headphones didn't work, then I could get those devices to our IT team to make sure they would be ready to go on test day. Third, this allows test takers testing in a language that requires a virtual keyboard to be installed time to get familiar with that virtual keyboard and to ensure that it will work on test day. This is also a great time to go over the test taker guidelines with test takers. They will see these as they log into the test and have to click that they agree to them, but best practice would be to go over these with test takers in advance so that you can ensure that they are aware of what they are agreeing to. We know that students and even many adults don't always read the things that we should before moving forward, so it's a good way to make sure that they're aware. We also have tutorial videos available on our website to help prepare test takers. There is a video called Getting Started, which is about a 4-minute video overview of the test and technology requirements. There's also a 3 to 4 minute video about each section of the test: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. These videos will help test takers identify things they can do to demonstrate their best skills on the test. There are also videos made specifically for the STAMP e-test for our elementary test takers. This would be good to look at together as a class, or if you're working with older students, you could send them the links to watch on their own. I would also go over a few specific testing rules with my classes. I would emphasize ahead of testing time that no pen or pencil and paper are allowed. No outside resources are allowed, such as cell phones or dictionaries, and no other websites should be accessed during testing. We do have an option for handwritten writing on the writing part of the test, especially for those younger test takers, but no pen or pencil and paper should be accessed by test takers who are using that method before it's time. You also need to purchase handwritten writing tests ahead of time with Avant so that that is set up properly. Some logistics to be aware of ahead of test day are when and where you'll be testing, how much time you have set aside for testing, as well as who will be proctoring. I had students test in a computer lab sometimes because I knew that I could get the one that was in the quietest part of the building. And sometimes I'd have them test in my classroom just for comfort and familiarity and to make it not feel like something different than what they were used to. My classes were typically 30 to 40 students each, and I would proctor them myself, but you may have different circumstances or needs that dictate other arrangements. We'll get into a few aspects of the test and things that may come up during the test that may help you decide what will be best for your situation. Another logistical consideration is how many headsets you'll have. Sometimes I was able to have enough headsets for all of my test takers, and sometimes I would only be able to get about half of what I needed from the district. Either way, you may want to have half of your students start with reading and writing, and the other half start with listening and speaking. For test timing, we'll get into the specifics of how long the test takes the average test taker in each skill in a moment. I taught high school on a block schedule and would typically block out 3 to 4 classes to complete the test. If I had blocked out 4 days, the goal was to complete one section of the test each day, and then I would have students who finished before that class period was over. I would have them work on an individual project that they had so that they wouldn't disturb test takers who needed longer to complete that section of the test that they were working on that day. If I had blocked out 3 days, I would tell them to get 1 or 2 sections done each day, and then those who finished earlier could then work on their project. For younger learners taking the STAMP E test, you'll probably want to tell them the order they are to complete the test in. With the STAMP E test, test takers can access any skill from the beginning, so you may want to have half start with reading, half start with listening, so that you can be prepared as students get to the productive sections of the test, so that you can manage the help that those youngest test takers will need. Now, the first thing I would do on test day was to make sure that test takers had no cell phones or pen and pencil and paper out. And I would have them move their backpacks to a specific area of the room so that they couldn't access anything that they should. I told them if they needed a water bottle or anything else that was acceptable during test time, to get that out of their backpack before starting the test and to keep it close to them. On test day, your test takers will access the test either with test codes that Avant provides or by logging in through Clever or ClassLink if that has been set up previously with your school or district and Avant Assessment. So if they access with test codes, they'll just navigate to this website here. And again, that will be in the links that will be shared. If they're accessing the test through Clever, it will look like that. And accessing the test through ClassLink will look like this. So once students log in, the first thing they will see are the test taker guidelines. Once they click, I agree, they will enter the test. STAMP E-test takers access the test. They will see this screen. You can see that they can take the test in any order. So again, you'll want to have a specific plan in place for what order you want them to take the test in. STAMP 4S test takers access the test. They will see this screen. You'll notice that 4S test takers must start with either reading or listening because of the adaptive design of the test. Test takers may not access the writing section of the test until they have completed the reading section. And that's because we need to know what their level of proficiency is in reading to make sure that we are delivering the most appropriate writing prompts to the test takers. And that same relationship exists between listening and speaking. When STAMP WS test takers access the test, they will see this screen. The WS test is a writing and speaking test only. So to make sure that we are delivering the most appropriate prompts in writing and speaking, test takers must complete a self-evaluation in the associated receptive skill. So they need to complete the self-evaluation for reading before they can access writing, and the self-evaluation for listening before they can access speaking. Here we see the average test taker time in each skill of the 4SE test. Average test taker times are similar on the 4S test, where test takers will complete 30 multiple choice style questions in reading and 30 multiple choice style questions in listening. On the STAMP E test, test takers complete the reading section in 25 to 35 minutes, and they complete the listening section in 25 to 30 minutes. Test takers respond to 2 prompts in writing and 2 prompts in speaking. They complete each of those sections in 15 to 20 minutes on average. For the STAMP 4S test, the average test taker time in reading and listening is 35 to 40 minutes each. On the 4S test, test takers will respond to 3 writing prompts and 3 speaking prompts. Writing and speaking sections are typically completed in 20 to 25 minutes each. With the STAMP WS, the login and self-assessment takes approximately 15 minutes, and writing and speaking takes the average test taker 20 to 25 minutes in each of those sections. Here we see the adaptive design of the test for reading and listening. You can see the test takers start with a handful of questions in a certain range of proficiency, and as they answer those initial questions, an algorithm determines what the next most appropriate level of question is to ask each individual test taker. As the test takers move through the reading and listening sections of the test algorithm continues to adapt to them, making sure that test takers are appropriately challenged by the questions they receive and not overly challenged. Once test takers have completed 30 questions, we can determine the level of proficiency in that skill. Now we'll jump into the different sections of the test and what your test takers will experience. For our purposes today, we'll start with reading, then writing, then listening, then speaking. One important thing to know about the test is that each section of the test has one practice item before the section begins. So there is one practice reading item before the section begins, one practice writing item, etc. This is another opportunity to ensure that technology is working properly and that students can type and record appropriately during testing. This is an example of a reading question on the 4S test. Here, students have a situation, a question, and answer options, and the text that they will read to determine their answer. One thing to be aware of on the reading section is that sometimes a text may have two questions associated with it. Students will only see one question at a time and may realize on the second question that they got the first question wrong. It happened to me. When that's happened before in my class, I had students raise their hand and ask where the back button is. I would explain to them that there is no back button to go back to a previous question because we're measuring proficiency, which is doing the best we can with the knowledge and skills we have at that time. I would also tell my students that no one question was going to make or break their score. Another question that sometimes comes up is if students can take a break from the reading section before they're finished and go on to another section of the test. Test takers are not able to do this. They will need to complete the section they are in before they can move on to another section. The test also has save features for each section of the test. In the reading section, in a worst case scenario, where maybe the power goes out or the internet gets cut, if students are logged out of the test or log themselves out of the test, once they log back in, they will be able to pick up right where they left off. We'll talk about the save features in other sections of the test as we go to those sections. Another aspect of the test to be aware of is that the STAMP test does not have a lockdown browser. What we do have is a notification that will pop up, as you see here, if students click outside of the testing screen. You can see that it tells the test taker that they've clicked outside of the test page, that that is not permitted, and that it has been tracked. It mentions that clicking outside of the active test screen may terminate the test, which will log them out. If test takers are logged out due to clicking outside of the test screen, they can log back in, but if you as a proctor see this notification pop up on a test taker's screen, please just check in to make sure that everything is okay and see if they need any help. So one thing along with this is I would always position myself in the back of the classroom so that I could monitor screens, and then I would obviously walk in and among the students while they're testing just to make sure that things are going well. And sometimes they'd have questions that they were a little nervous to raise their hand up high. So it's good to be walking among the students so that they can just lean over and ask you a question they may have regarding test functionality. One question we sometimes get from test takers about this feature, this pop-up notification, is if it will negatively affect their score. This will not affect their score at all, but they should avoid actions that will cause this notification to pop up. This is an example of a reading section item on the STAMP 4SE test, where students have a question, and then they'll hover over an image and select the appropriate image as their answer. Students have a status bar at the bottom of the screen that allows them to see how far along they are within the section. When students have completed their 30 reading questions, they will see this screen where they can move on to writing, or they could start listening. Again, for our purposes today, we'll go through the test in the order shown. The writing section of the test looks like this, where test takers have a prompt written in English. They can listen to that prompt in the testing language, and then they have an image to accompany the prompt and a response box. Test takers will type their response in the response box as shown here. And again, there's a status bar at the bottom of the screen so they can see how far along they are in the section. The save feature for the writing section will save after every keystroke. So again, in a worst case scenario where maybe the power goes out or the internet cuts, a test taker's progress will be saved in the writing section. If test takers need to take a break, they can click Stop Test in the corner of the screen and log out. We recommend that breaks be taken only after a section is completed. Once test takers log back in, their progress will be saved and they can resume where they left off. So if they're using codes, they'll just come back to this screen. They'll use their test code and password that Avant provides. They'll click Continue Test, and then they'll put in their login name. And this, we recommend that at the district or school level, that this be a predetermined naming convention, so as to avoid students putting in the wrong login name. Now we'll take a look at the listening section of the test. And again, here we see a situation with an image, a question, and answer options. Stamp E test takers can click the audio button 2 times, and each time they click it, they will hear the audio 2 times, meaning they can hear the audio a total of 4 times. On the Stamp 4S, test takers can only click and hear the audio 2 times. For 4S test takers, the audio will play once each time they click the button, and they can only click the button 2 times. I told my students to be sure to read the situation, the question, and answer options before clicking the audio button, because I have bad test taking habits, and I would typically click the audio button after reading the situation. As I got older and realized that I can only hear the audio 2 times, I want to make sure that I know what the question is, what the answer options are that I'm looking for or listening for before I play the audio the first time. The save feature for the listening section is the same as the reading section, where it will resume right where a student left off. The speaking section of the test is where some test takers tend to get a little bit nervous. Before I started having half of my classroom start with reading and writing and the other half start with listening and speaking, my test takers would just do the test right in order from reading to writing to listening to speaking. And that meant that the first couple of students to get to the speaking section would get pretty nervous. They'd start to look around. And then what they would normally do is they would cup the microphone with their hand and lean forward. They would whisper their response because they didn't want other test takers looking at them. So this is one of the reasons I began to split the test up. And I would tell my students that at some point, someone will be the first person to start the speaking section. And that if that happens to be you, yes, people are likely to turn and look at you. But I would always say, believe me, they are much more concerned with what they're doing and the fact that they're going to be speaking soon than listening to you. Another thing that test takers sometimes do is play with their microphone with their hands. And this causes kind of a scratching sound that can interfere with the ability to hear the test taker clearly. So please help test takers get the microphone to a comfortable spot where they can hear their recording clearly on the practice item, then just have them leave the microphone alone. For the speaking section, the only save feature is to return to the prompt. No responses can be saved, only submitted. Test takers will have a prompt that they can read in English and that they can listen to in the testing language by clicking the play button at the bottom. Again, there is one practice item before test takers will respond to their prompts. As test takers are accessing the practice item, they should look at the microphone strength indicator on the side to see if they may need some help before they begin. They will also need to record something before moving on to the actual prompts. After they've recorded, they should listen back to what they have recorded to make sure that the sound quality is good so that raters will be able to hear them clearly and give the most appropriate score. When test takers are responding to their test prompts, as they listen back to what they've recorded, if the sound quality is not good, they can click on the garbage button and delete that recording. Then they can re-record their response to make sure the sound quality is good. And as they listen back to their recording, if they notice that they have a really good recording, but maybe they forgot an important detail, then they can click the add button to add to the end of their recording. Once test takers are happy with their recording, they will click the next button. And as they complete their speaking prompts, they will then see that they have completed the test and will be able to log out. If you have any technical issues during testing, this is the number and email for our support team. You should have this information handy during testing just in case anything comes up. And again, this information will be available in the follow-up email that you'll receive. Now let's take a look at how to access your results. You'll log into the screen, or you'll go to the login screen and use your Proctor results test code and password that Avant provides. Once you're logged into your results, the first thing you'll see is the group average for whatever group it is that you're looking at. You may have tested a third grade French immersion class or a high school Vietnamese syllabi literacy testing group. Whatever the group is that you're looking at, you will see the average score for each test taker in that group. As a classroom teacher, this data is very helpful. If I had tested my Spanish 3 students, for example, I knew that my expected outcome for students was intermediate low, which is a 4 on the STAMP scale. You can see here how the STAMP scale aligns to the proficiency guidelines, where a score of 1 is novice low, 2 is novice mid, 3 is novice high, and so on and so on. With this data, I could see at a quick glance how that particular group scored. And if this were my Spanish 3 class, I'd be able to identify that we're pretty low in speaking, but meeting our targets, if not exceeding our targets everywhere else. Below that, I see the breakdown or the distribution of test takers, where I can see the number and percentage of students who have scored where in each section of the test. This is helpful because the average doesn't tell the full story. For example, on this data set, I can see that 9 test takers scored in the advanced range on listening. Seeing the data in this view makes me curious who certain test takers are and lets me know that I need to individualize instruction and learning for certain individuals who are maybe a little behind or who are ahead of where the class targets are. This slide again shows how the Avant score aligns to the proficiency guidelines, and we see some statuses that we'll see again in just a moment. You can filter your results by date. So if you have administered the test to different groups or at different times, and you need to isolate one set of data, you can do that here. You can print group reports and individual reports, as well as download test taker data into an Excel file. Downloading the data into the Excel file will allow you to use that data to create other reports that you may want. This is what that Excel file will look like. Okay, and then again, as you first log into your results, this is what you'll see. And as you scroll down the page, the next thing you'll see on your report are the individual test takers with their scores. So all the sections on the report can be filtered by clicking on them. For example, I could click on reading to have my highest or lowest scored readers appear first. Here we also see those statuses that we talked about just a minute ago. So NS stands for not started, meaning that a student has not started that section of the test. IP means in progress, meaning that a student has started that section but not completed it. SP means scoring in progress, which means the test taker has completed that section and you're now waiting on Avant to score it. This NR that you see here in red means non-rateable and is going to be a technology issue that we've been able to identify. So if you see a score of NR like this, you can click right on it, and you can actually click on any of these scores, and that will pull up the details of that score. So you can see each response to prompts, the score each of those received, and if any of those are NR, you can click on that blue response link to check that out. You can do that whether it's NR or not. So what that looks like, if I were to click on the response, then I'll see what their prompt was, and I'll be able to click and listen to their recording to see what it is that the student produced. If you do happen to have an NR, you can contact Avant Assessment and make sure that that NR gets reset at no cost so that the student can go back in and redo that section and get a score. You can also access test takers' writing prompts and responses. And this is nice to do with them where possible to point out the things they've really done well as point to the things that they can continue to work on as they build to the next level of proficiency. The test taker's individual report looks like this, where for the individual, you'll see where they've scored in each skill, as well as a composite score. Down here, you'll see a description of what learners can do at each level, or at the level that they've reached in each skill, as well as suggestions for things they can do to power up to the next level of proficiency. On the individual report, you may see a shaded area like this, and this will happen in the writing and speaking sections of the test if a test taker had one response that rated at a higher level. So this is just showing that the test taker is demonstrating ability at the next level. Finally, on this slide, we see an example from the Avant Annual Averages Report. This is a report that we publish on our website every year around December for the previous school year. For the Stamp 4S, it will show the average test taker score by language and year of study. So in my example, I could see where my Spanish 3 students have scored and then compare that to the average across the country. We also have this for the Stamp 4S e-test, where data has been collected from immersion programs and will show the average score by grade level in each skill. This was helpful for me and my school district when we were overhauling our curriculum and revisiting our proficiency benchmarks by year of study, where we had Stamp test data, we had our proficiency benchmarks by level, but we just wanted to kind of revisit those because we were scoring better than what our previous benchmarks were. So it just helped to round out that discussion as we looked to move forward. So where do you go from here? Here are some tips. Help students do their best, motivate them for success, review student writing and speaking responses, work with Avant staff for NR resets, use data to inform instruction, view trends, and have discussions. Apply lessons learned from the first year and contact Avant's More Learning team for your professional learning needs. Thank you so much for your time. Here's to a successful testing season for you all. Please be in touch with your account manager for any additional questions. This is our map of the United States and the territory that each one of the account managers covers, as well as our email addresses. Come back to this in just 1 minute. We also have our global map. And so you can see that. And don't forget about the link that will be here at the end for your feedback and what you would like to see us share in the future. So thanks again, and we will open things up for questions. see here. Ben, are you able to kind of help me out with some of the questions we have here?
Sure, yeah. So we had a hand raised from Carol, and I think we'll address her question here that she dropped in the Q&A. So she wanted to know if my students take the Stamp 4S and get at least a 6, will they get both the global and the seal of biliteracy in Michigan? So I think she's referring to the state seal as well as the global seal.
Okay. So I'm not familiar with the requirements for the state seal in Michigan. I know the global seal will award at 3 different levels. One is a stamp level 5 across all 4 skills, which is intermediate mid, and then also at a level 7 across all 4 skills, advanced low, and then at advanced high in all 4 skills.
Thanks, Roger. We got a question about who is rating written and verbal submissions.
Yeah, so our raters are largely current and former teachers, professors, and they're trained constantly on the proficiency guidelines. Yeah, so we're always looking for more raters, so feel free to drop an application. And yeah, always looking for more raters.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. And for those that have their hands up, if you wouldn't mind just typing the questions into the Q&A, that would be the best way for us to be sure we address the ones that we can today. We had a question that just came in from Samantha. Can a student take the Stamp 4S test more than once?
Yes. So if a student takes the Stamp 4S, there needs to be at least 90 days between starting one test and starting another test. So they should complete a 4S test they should complete any test within 90 days of starting it, and then they can start another one after 90 days.
Great. And I see a question from, okay, that one just got answered by Nick. So we got a question from Lindsay. What happens if a student has heard the listening prompt twice on the 4S, but the power goes out? Will they be able to hear the listening prompt again when they log back in?
It's one I'm not certain of, but I don't think so. I'm not certain. I'm not sure if any of the other account managers that are helping answer those questions maybe has that answer.
Yeah, it looks like Nick is currently typing an answer. So Lindsay, you'll get a response there in a moment. We had a question about the global seal. Could you discuss the global seal and just give us a high-level overview of what that is and maybe what makes it different from the state seal?
Yeah, so state seals we now have in all 50 states and DC, which is great. So state seals, the levels needed to obtain the state seal kind of vary from state to state, which is great that the states can make that their own determination. It does make it a little difficult. For example, if a student gets a state seal of biliteracy in one state, I'm in Utah, for example, if my children were to go to college in another state, then they would have to really dig into and find out what that means and what the requirements were for them to reach that in the state of Utah. So the global seal kind of helps cut across that. And it's not intended to replace. It's a nice companion to go along with the state seal. But the global seal, like I said, will award at 3 different levels, one at intermediate mid, one at advanced low, and one at advanced high. For those 3 different levels, it also provides a serial number on each certificate. So that's nice because it allows the individual to then put that on like their LinkedIn profile, for example, so that they can quantify their skills. That way they're not just saying, yeah, I speak Spanish or whatever the language may be. And
And we might have lost you at the tail end there, Roger, but I think we're back now. So hopefully, Leslie, that answered your questions there, and you can get more information at theglobalseal.com. Okay, I see Nick is answering a question from Savannah at the moment. We got a question, when I submit my testing groups and get codes for them year after year, if I have the same testing group in subsequent years, will the code be the same?
Okay, no, that will not. The order number will change. So yeah, it's good to keep that for consistency's sake, but the code will change each year, and you'll be able to access that with your Proctor results login that will come right along with those. I don't know if that makes sense. So when you get your codes back, you'll have one set of codes for test takers to log in, and then another set of codes right below that for you to log into each group and view the results.
Great, thanks, Roger. And we had an anonymous question. Is STAMP the only test available for the global seal? Just going back to that really quick.
No, they'll accept a large number of tests that can be found on their website. I'm not sure the number. There's quite a few tests that they'll accept.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I can just address a question here from Bo. They asked, where can we find the average scores bar charts you displayed on the site? We'll include that in the email that's going out to you after the webinar. The question, maybe Roger, you can help me answer is, are they global average scores or just the US for the annual averages report?
Actually, Nick might know the answer to that more than I do. As far as I know, it's national, but Nick could probably verify that.
Hey, Bo, I'm going to leave your question there to see if we get a response from Nick. Yeah, so I'm actually seeing in a separate chat, yes, national. And Nick is typing an answer as well. All right.
You, Nick.
Samantha, yeah, thank you, Nick. Samantha asked, does the Stamp 4S qualify a student for the state or global seal, or is a separate test required?
Yeah, as far as I know, the stamp is accepted in all 50 states for state seals, and it is definitely accepted for the global seal.
Okay, we got a question in the chat here. Can you elaborate on the reports? Do they report the actual scores?
Yes. Let's see, let me go back. So they are aligned to the actual proficiency guidelines, as you can see here. So a score of 1 on stamp is novice low, 2 is novice mid, and so on and so on.
Okay, and I think a lot of the questions in the chat have been addressed. If you have a new one, please drop it in the Q&A. Seeing one came in from Anna. Yeah, if a student earned the state seal that they live in Massachusetts, that means they got at least intermediate high. So would that mean that they automatically earn the global seal? Can they be recognized with both?
Yeah, you'll just need to get that information into the folks at the global seal. But yeah, intermediate high, yeah, they'll qualify. I should
Great.
specify as long as they've met that in all 4 skills.
We got a question from Bo about setting a limit for how many times students can record their response on the speaking portion of the test, or possibly a time limit.
Yeah, so next year that will be reduced to where they can only delete and re-record just 1 time, as well as the add button. They'll only be able to add to that 1 time. As a proctor, after gaining some experience, I would tell my test takers that they only had 1 opportunity to do that, even though it wasn't true. Just because what I would tell my students is that the test may not be timed, but we as a class and as a teacher, we are on a time crunch. So we can only dedicate so much time. So I didn't want to rush them, but reality is you can only dedicate so much time to it. So yeah, I would kind of nudge them along that way.
I see a couple of the Q&As are being addressed. as we're speaking here, I'm going to mark that one done. And I see Nick is replying in the chat right now. Yeah, if you guys still have more, please put them in the Q&A. That would be the best place for us to make sure that we address them. Eileen asked the 2 times for the speaking, will that be for now or for 24, 25? I think you were saying for the next upcoming year, right?
Right, 24, 25.
Great, thank you. So Lori put in the chat here, I've had trouble with students taking a painfully long time on this test. Any tips for pushing students along without setting a time limit?
Yeah, kind of like I mentioned, I would try and push them along, just mentioning, that the test isn't timed, but we are on a time limit. And then on the speaking, it was easier to say you can only do that one time. And I know it's hard. I remember very specifically my last year in the classroom, I had a student who took a very long time on the reading section. But I also knew from things he would do in class that he was a very strong reader. He would really take his time, but he was a very strong reader. And I had a hard time kind of cutting him off. So with him, I just said, hey, we can only dedicate so much class time. I am here after school. And that's, maybe, I don't know if that was good or bad for me to offer for him to be after school and finish that up. But I just knew that in reading specifically, he needed an extra long time. He didn't have a 504 or anything, but I just knew that personally that he needed that additional time. So yeah, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Roger. And Lisa, I saw your question. I apologize for missing it in the chat earlier. She asked, can you tell us more about the monolingual 4S? What would be the benefits of using this assessment as opposed to the other regular 4S test?
Yeah, so the monolingual test is available in Spanish and Arabic currently. Monolingual test is written at about an intermediate level. So for native or heritage Spanish speakers or Arabic speakers, it's written for those students who having the instructions, the test questions, etc., in English would be more of a barrier to them demonstrating their best skills. So we want to remove that barrier. So for those students, that's ideal. We know we get a lot of questions about, well, I want all my students to take it in Spanish. That it gets a little tricky because the test isn't going to take into account, are they missing questions because they didn't understand the text that they're reading, or because they didn't understand the directions for the section, different things like that. So you're going to want to make sure that your test takers who use that are reading already at about an intermediate mid-level.
Great. Thanks, Roger. I see a question here about who can proctor. So can you just give an overview of that?
Yeah, so proctors should be educators within the building, individuals who have looked over the proctor guides. I know for me, it's very common for me to walk through essentially this with clients ahead of testing, so that they can have that. We're currently working on videos to make things a little smoother and easier for people to be able to access that on their own. But yeah, it should be an educator within the building.
Thank you. Sandra asked in the chat, can students take 2 domains in the morning, 2 skills, and the other 2 after school? Can they be tested individually and stretched out throughout the week?
Yeah, absolutely. We recommend testing in multiple sittings. Average test taker time for the 4S is a little over 2 hours. So yeah, where possible, it's preferable to break that up and do one skill, maybe two, have a break, and then come back and do that. So yeah, that would be good practice.
You know, a highlight of testing season for me when I was a student was getting goldfish in between sections. So little breaks like that to encourage the kids is always good. We did get a question from Peggy on the cost. Roger, do you want to bring the map back up here? And for situations like that, or where situations may vary, the pricing varies. So the best thing to do is to reach out to the account manager in your area. So we've got that on the screen for you there, Peggy. Clara said, I'm used to doing speaking in small groups. Is this recommended?
Yeah, depending on your setup, I know like with the elementary students, that's probably going to be a lot easier if you did that in smaller groups. For me, like I said, I was proctoring 30 to 40 students at a time, and we try and space them out as best we could. But there really wasn't any issue. So if the concern is like volume and things like that, for me, it was never an issue. But then again, your circumstances are what your circumstances are, and you know better than someone else what's going to be best for you and your students.
Great. Okay. If there are any other questions, please put them in the Q&A. I see a question from Carol on how long it takes to receive the state seal by literacy or the global seal once you've applied.
Yeah, the state seal, I wouldn't know, and that's probably going to vary from state to state. The global seal, I don't know for certain. When I did it a few years ago, we got ours within, I think it was like 10 business days. I'm not real certain on their timeline though, so I apologize.
And Jen asked, are the prompts for the speaking provided in the TL? As I remember, teachers shared the prompts were given in English.
So the prompts are written in English, but then they can be listened to in the target language or the testing language.
Great, and I see some praise from Lori Beth. We appreciate it. We're just here to help. Thanks for being so informative. Peggy had a clarification question about the global seal. So it's not a state initiative, correct? That is correct. So the seal on diplomas do not come from the state. Yeah, the global seal is a separate entity from the state seals of biliteracy. As Roger was lining out earlier, it is a standard as a standardized set of qualifications. So where some states may have an intermediate mid or intermediate low, the global seal provides that standardized format that that can be recognized nationwide, regardless of the situation. Roger, is there anything else to kind of fill in on that?
No, I think you hit it. That's its kind of purpose is to cut across those kind of varying state standards.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, for dropping the link in there. And yeah, Lori Beth pointed out the global seal is helpful for private schools whose students don't qualify for state seals. Yeah, it's a big gap that it fills. I see a question in the Q&A about can a student apply for the state seal if they took the test a year ago? I think that would vary by state, Roger.
Right.
Laura asked, can they have scratch paper to take notes?
No pen or pencil and paper during testing at all, unless they have a handwritten writing section purchased, and if that's already been set up with Avant. And in that case, once they've completed the reading, then the teacher would log in, access their specific prompts, print those out. It will have the student's name on it, and then they'll write and then hand that back to the teacher, and they'll submit that back to Avant. And that is a little bit different. The first time I administered the stamp test, my students were pretty thrown by that. And again, I just reminded them it's, it's proficiency. You're doing the best you can with the knowledge and skills you have at the time. And, we're just going to see what you would be able to do in the real world in a spontaneous circumstance.
All right, Roger, we're going to wrap it up here because we are at time. If anybody has any outstanding questions that weren't addressed today, we have the map with the account managers across the US on the screen here. So please feel free to just go ahead and reach out to them with any of those specific questions that might pertain to your testing environment there. Roger, any closing remarks? We sure appreciate you leading this today.
I apologize for the lighting. This is the time of year when it hits really weird in this room, but I just appreciate everyone for attending and for seeking any answers or tips and things that you may need. So thank you all. And like Ben said, please reach out to us for anything else that we can help with.